whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, haere ake nei, a minor cabinet reshuffle or two major scalps for the opposition. The Speaker's a lame duck. Poto Williams is sacked as Police Minister and Mr Fix-It, aka Chris Hipkins, steps in. KiwiSaver provider Simplicity calls a crisis meeting with Fletcher's, this time over its $35 million worth of shares and what the jib crisis is doing to them. Fletcher Building CEO Ross Taylor reckons it was impossible to forecast. He joins us on the program for an extended interview. New faces, old heads and a rugby league convert, why there's plenty to talk about in the All Blacks first squad of 2022. And the weather, well, it's rubbish if you hadn't already noticed. You can check us out live on Freeview Channel 50. RNZ News at 5. Ahi marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Poto Williams is no longer Police Minister in a cabinet reshuffle announced this afternoon. The Prime Minister has taken the job off the embattled minister and given it to Chris Hipkins instead. Jacinda Ardern says both she and Ms Williams agree the focus of the portfolio hasn't been where it needs to be.
Our concern has been the need to focus on particularly ongoing legislative reform where it's needed to support the police is not necessarily where the focus is with the current narrative around the portfolio. We need to get back to those basics.
Jacinda Ardern says she maintains confidence in Poto Williams, who keeps her place in Cabinet and picks up the conservation and disability portfolios. Chris Hipkins' COVID response portfolio has been given to Aisha Verrill. In other changes, Chris Farfoy has resigned from Parliament to spend time with his family, and Kitty Allen has been promoted to Justice Minister. Mr Farfoy's other two portfolios, immigration and broadcasting, go to Michael Wood and Willie Jackson respectively, while Ethnic Communities Minister Priyanka Radhakrishnan is promoted to Cabinet. Trevor Mallard will step down as Speaker in mid-August to take up a diplomatic posting in Europe, and Adrian Rudafe is to be nominated to replace him. Wild weather has been battering the west coast of the lower North Island, damaging properties and infrastructure. Emergency response teams are scrambling to do what they can before the next high tide. Somya Bamiripati reports.
Met Service has issued a heavy swell warning for the Kapiti Porirua coast until 2 a.m, with waves expected to reach 7 metres this evening. The Horizons Regional Council has set up a flood barrier at Foxton Beach to prepare for high tide at about 8:30. Power outages are affecting hundreds of people from Paikakariki to Foxton, some since last night, and Paikakariki Hill Road is closed because of multiple slips. State Highway 56 at Opiki and State Highway 1 near Martin are also closed due to flooding.
On the west coast of the South Island, emergency management staff have been meeting with coastal Bulla residents, helping those who wish to evacuate to higher ground. High sea swells have sent waves right up to people's doorsteps in townships like Granity, Hector, Mokihinui and Ngakawo. Bulla Mayor Jamie Klein says the region is preparing for another rough night. Some Waikanae residents are also nervously bracing for more wild weather. People living around the intersection of Queen's Road and Barrett Drive have today been cleaning up from two mini tornadoes that struck at about 7 last night. Rebecca Stringfellow says her house was in its path and is now uninhabitable.
It just went through our front porch, so I just grabbed the kids and like a rugby ball and just took them to the other side of the house. And then that's when all the wind and everything was just coming through the lounge, through the broken glass window and everything like that. So, yeah, it was pretty scary.
Rebecca Stringfellow says she and her young children will stay with family for the rest of the week. And Fletcher Building says it's ramping up jib production and importing plasterboard to try to meet the critical shortage of the product. Chief Executive Ross Taylor says no one could have foreseen the global supply problems alongside a big jump in the number of building consents during the pandemic. However, he accepts his company's near monopoly of the plasterboard market brings with it the responsibility to meet demand.
We've really got to work hard and work our factories 24/7 and do everything we can to source product to make this transition as we get capacity into the market as seamless as possible.
Ross Taylor says stockpiling is only a small part of the problem. There'll be more about this on Checkpoint shortly. To sport, and veteran Hurricanes halfback TJ Perenara is the most glaring omission from the first All Blacks squad of the year. The 30-year-old, who's played 78 tests, is not in coach Ian Foster's 36-strong squad for next month's 3-test series against Ireland. Foster's named 6 newcomers, among them former Warriors skipper and now Blues midfielder Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, who he says has come on leaps and bounds.
If you look from the start of the campaign to now, he's improving. And so he's improving in a whole lot of aspects. And he's still, I think by his own admission, he'll have some areas that he's got to get a bit better at. But we believe the time's right. Bring him in and let's start working with him.
Another to miss out is Chiefs halfback Brad Webber. Meanwhile, former Wales and British and Irish Lions first five, Phil Bennett, has died at the age of 73. Bennett guided Wales to 2 Five Nations Grand Slams in the 1970s and led the Lions on the 1977 tour of New Zealand. The second cricket test between New Zealand and England heads into day 4 tonight with a draw on the cards. England will resume their first innings at 473 for 5, 80 runs in arrears of New Zealand. And New Zealand golfer Danny Lee has recorded his 3rd top 10 finish of the season. He tied for 10th at the Canadian Open in Toronto, which was won by Rory McIlroy of Northern Ireland. That's the news.
Wild weather sweeps across the country.
We were hunkered down, and then my wife sort of had a look out the window and said to me, Paul, the fence is gone.
Artificial intelligence is getting smarter.
It depends on what you think sentient is, whether you think the ultimate off switch, which is the switch on the wall, will still work.
And our listeners have some fashion advice.
This listener says socks and jandals rule. There you go.
No.
Walking the talk. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Watches and warnings are in place for heavy rain, snow, severe gales and thunderstorms in many parts of the country. For all of the North Island except Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail, easing this evening. Snow above 1,000 metres affecting the desert road today. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers clearing this evening. Isolated showers are possible south of Napier today. Looking to Te Waipoinamu, Marlborough and Nelson, heavy showers and thunderstorms squally in the west, clearing for most places this evening. A few showers are possible tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, a few showers today and snow above 800 metres. Fine spells increasing tomorrow. For Otago, Southland, Fiordland, showers, snow above 300 to 400 metres. For Bulla and Westland, isolated showers becoming widespread tomorrow, some heavy. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, showers with possible thunderstorms. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have headlines and the latest traffic for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Wild weather, Fletcher CEO Ross Taylor on jib and the new All Blacks lineup coming up. But first, the Prime Minister has shaken up her cabinet lineup following the surprise departures of 2 key team members. Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard will leave next month and the Justice Minister Chris Farfoy even sooner. Jacinda Ardern has also taken the opportunity to switch up the police portfolio, which means goodbye Portal Williams, hello Chris Hipkins. Here's our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch.
This is not the minor reshuffle promised. This is a significant shake-up and one sparked by some significant departures. None greater than the Speaker of Parliament himself.
Trevor Mallard will step down as Speaker in mid-August as he prepares to take up a diplomatic post in Europe.
It comes after a turbulent period for the Speaker, with the opposition criticising his handling of February's anti-vax protest and the issuing and then withdrawal of trespass notices on prominent figures, including Winston Peters. There was also an expensive legal stoush after he said in 2019 that there was a rapist working on Parliament's premises.
Mallard hunting season ended 2 days ago on the 6th of June, but there's one more duck that needs to go.
The Prime Minister is the ultimate controller of Trevor Mallard's destiny, and we call on her to do the right thing and remove Trevor Mallard from office.
Trevor's had a very hard job, exacerbated by some issues that no other Speaker has faced. That is not the cause of his departure.
Mallard has declined to be interviewed today, citing long-planned medical procedures this week. But in a series of tweets, he says he had informed the Prime Minister last year that he'd prefer to move on during this term. Adrian Rurefe will take over, while Mr Mallard moves into a plum posting abroad, likely in Dublin.
It will be befitting of Trevor's skills and interests and will make him the third of our 5 most recent speakers to represent New Zealand abroad.
The other departure is Chris Farfoy, a former TVNZ reporter turned MP and then minister. It was widely known he wanted to retire at the 2020 election, but was convinced to stay on, but only until now.
It's a bittersweet day because I've been here for a while, but it is absolutely time to call it a day.
He will be greatly missed, but I know we can never miss him as much as his family already has.
Chris Farfoy had a busy workload, meaning a lot of jobs need to be divvied out. Justice to Kitty Allen, immigration to Michael Wood and broadcasting to Willie Jackson. Priyanka Radhakrishnan steals the free seat at the cabinet table. But that's not where today's shake-up ends.
I've also made the decision to change Poto Williams out of her police portfolio. Poto is a capable minister and retains my confidence, but change is required.
As widely expected, Poto Williams has been sidelined, stripped of her police portfolio after a concerted campaign from the opposition. She's come under increasing pressure in recent months amid a spate of gang violence. And National's Christopher Luxon last week called for her to go.
She's clearly out of her depth. It's time for Poto Williams to be removed as police minister.
He gets what he wants, Poto Williams out, though she stays in cabinet, taking on responsibility for conservation and disability issues. Ms Ardern says Ms Williams did a good job, but the narrative needs a reset.
What we have both agreed, though, is that the focus on the portfolio, where it needs to be, has been lost in recent times. We need to get back to those basics.
Chris Hipkins will be tasked with that responsibility, handing his COVID role to Aisha Verrill and a chunk of his education role to Jan Tinetti. There had been a question mark hanging over Nanaia Mahuta too, with accusations the foreign minister has been missing in action. She keeps that position and local government, but Kieran McAnulty comes in as a minister outside cabinet with a focus on regional issues. Expect him to lend a helping hand with the Three Waters reform.
These changes are an acknowledgement of our 2 departing colleagues, but they're also a nod to the future.
That means this is not the end of Ms Ardern's rethink. She says there will be a more comprehensive review of the lineup early next year. And if today's was billed as minor, next year's could be quite the spectacle.
And joining us now is political veteran, former party leader and cabinet minister Peter Dunn. Kia ora, Peter. What's your impression of this minor shake-up?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, I think in terms of impact, it's going to have minimal impact on the government's political fortunes. The big issues are still there. There's still going to be drive-by shootings in Auckland. The cost of living is still going up. There's nothing in this that makes those changes. I think the other interesting thing about it is I can't recall an occasion where the retirement of the Speaker has brought about a cabinet reshuffle. And what that suggests is that Mr Mallard was a far more integral player in the Labour Party's political fortunes than the impartial Speaker he was supposed to be. It has long been suspected he'd been effectively a Labour Party agent, if you like, as Speaker when he's supposed to be independent. This confirms the intimacy of his role, and I think that's a very bad look for Parliament, that its presiding officer is frankly admitted to be a political tool.
So what then do you make of the fact that he's getting a prime posting, it would appear?
I think that's probably something that deserves the charity of my silence.
Do you think he's particularly diplomatic?
No.
So in terms of the reshuffle, if you don't think it's going to make a material difference to Labour's fortunes, why do it?
Well,
has the opposition got themselves 2 scalps?
No, I think well, in some sense they have, but I think why it brought on now is the Farfoy was clearly keen to go. Mallard, I think, would have gone when he was told it was time to go. I think it's a convenient opportunity for the government to try and re-seize or recapture some of the lost political initiative. So get the focus back on them doing the things that they want to be doing. My point is, though, I just don't think it's going to have that immediate impact. And they don't have a lot of time. They've got just under 18 months to the election. They've got to make some big changes. They've got to get on top of the cost of living. They've got to get on top of law and order. And although the appointments of new ministers of justice and police, I think the 2 individual appointments are good ones, I just don't think they're going to have the time to make a huge impact.
OK, let's talk about Poto Williams, right? So the opposition have been baying for her to go for some time now. Prime Minister said today she still has faith in her, right? And she maintains her cabinet position. If you still have faith in her and you still think she's good with her job, why get rid of her then?
Well, I think the move, she's still the Minister of Building and Construction, as I understand it. She's now going to Conservation and Disability as well. They may well be portfolios more suited to her skills. She was certainly looking like a fish out of water in the police portfolio. And with all that's going on in that space at the moment, the government really couldn't afford to keep her. But
you're just capitulating, aren't you, Peter, to the get tough on gangs rhetoric?
You're capitulating, if you like, to public opinion. And after all, that's what elects governments. But what I was just going to go on and say was, in terms of that capitulation line, to have dismissed her from the cabinet altogether would have been too big a step to take and too big an admission of failure to make.
What about Mr Fix-It, Chris Hipkins? So he comes in to take another portfolio that's a heavy load.
Yeah, look, I worry about him. I think he's highly skilled and competent, but he's the leader of the House, he's the Minister of Police now, he's the Minister of Public Services, he's given up the COVID responsibility, and I'm not clear whether he's given up all of the education portfolio or a large chunk of it, but he still has a massive workload, and I think he's going to be under pressure to perform. He's one of the better ministers, and he's been unfortunately punished for that, if you like.
We're almost out of time, Peter. Is there anyone else you would have got rid of or moved on?
Not at this stage. I think there will be others who will indicate over the next few months that they've had enough and want to move on, and that's what will make the January, February reshuffle next year probably the much more interesting one.
Good to talk to you, Peter. Thanks for joining us. That is Peter Dunn there, who's a political veteran and commentator. Wild weather continues to pummel districts north of Wellington in what's been described as an unprecedented storm on the Kapiti coast. A neighbourhood in Waikanai has been in clean-up mode today after 2 tornadoes hit the town overnight, and it's not over yet with stormy weather to continue. Rosie Gordon and our cameraman Samuel Rilstone have the story.
Rebecca Stringfellow's house at Waikanai Beach is uninhabitable and will be for the rest of the week. She says a localised tornado tore down Barrett Drive around 7 o'clock last night. Her house was in its path.
It just went through our front porch, so I just grabbed the kids and like a rugby ball and just took them to the other side of the house. And then that's when all the wind and everything was just coming through the lounge, through the broken glass window and everything like that. So yeah, it was pretty scary.
As soon as they could, Ms Stringfellow took her 3- and 4-year-old to her mum's place for the night. This morning she returned to assess the damage.
The tornado came straight through here, so this whole fencing has gone and our pillar for our roof, so we're just trying to see if the roof will actually hold up all right.
She says it also put 2 holes in an exterior wall and broke a window. Over the road, the fence that once surrounded Paul Knighton's house was flattened and the trampoline left in a tangled heap.
We just finished dinner. I've got 2 young kiddies, a 9 and a 7-year-old, and about 7:05, just a really howling wind, just a really loud noise, bit of shaking in the house, but not too dissimilar to an earthquake, but wasn't an earthquake. We kind of let it ride, and then my wife sort of turned through the blinds and said, "Paul, the fence is gone." So then it was all hands on deck.
And it was all hands on deck this morning too. The community pulled together, fixing down fences, picking up debris and clearing around 20 trees.
We probably had about 20 people out here not long after 9 o'clock this morning, chainsawing all the green waste.
And wild weather continued today. Large swells brought waves onto State Highway 59 north of Pukerua Bay and coastal debris onto the road in Plimerton. Plimerton resident Philippa Sargent tried to clear a flooding drain with a shovel near her waterfront home this morning as waves crashed up over the seawall.
I would have to say that this is probably the worst that I've seen in the time that I've lived here. Usually the boat ramp across the road doesn't have stones flying right up into the middle of the road, but they are today, and I saw that earlier and I thought, oh shit, maybe this is global warming right on our doorstep, you know.
There were more than 400 power outages in Kapiti and Horowhenua this afternoon. Kapiti's District Council had around 120 call-outs today. Most were flood-related. Lead Controller Jane James Jefferson says the storm's unprecedented.
This is an absolute beast of a storm. I'd like to say it's the beast from the east, but it's actually a wicked westerly has come in from the Australian Bight. This is the biggest storm I recall, and I've been around in some shape or form emergency management for many, many years.
And he says days of wild weather is having a compounding effect.
As we've had more and more rain, the ground becomes more and more sodden. Trees are a bit looser and they'll move, and there's been some horrendous gusts through this morning where trees are coming down.
High tide coupled with winds at Foxton Beach Wharf has led to flooding in some areas. Horowhenua District Council has deployed a preventative flood barrier across Hartley Street, with high tide at 8:30 set to be worse. The Kapiti Coast District Council says it expects wild weather to stick around until Wednesday. Not the news tornado hit locals wanted.
Just can't really get a break.
Nervous, but yeah, we'll just get there. It'll be what it will be. We'll do what we can do, and the sun will come up tomorrow.
But until it breaks through, locals are urged to stay away from the beach and continue calling the council to report damage.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, we'll put the video from Rosie and Samuel up on our webpage. And after 6 tonight, the Met Service is going to join us live for the latest on the weather around the rest of the country. It's 5:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we're keen on your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Homai o whakaaro, love to know about the weather in your area. Do text us, let us know what's going on there. 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also interested in your thoughts on the cabinet reshuffle. Poto Williams moved on from the police portfolio. Chris Hipkins brought in there, and Chris Farfoy and Trevor Mallard exiting Parliament altogether. Our email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And it's time for the headlines now. Anea Evie, mena pitipiti kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Poto Williams is no longer Police Minister. In a cabinet reshuffle announced this afternoon, the Prime Minister has taken the job off the embattled minister and given it to Chris Hipkins instead. In other changes, Chris Farfoy has resigned from Parliament to spend time with his family, and Kitty Allen has been promoted to Justice Minister. Mr Farfoy's other two portfolios, immigration and broadcasting, go to Michael Wood and Willie Jackson, respectively. Trevor Mallard will also step down as Speaker in mid-August to take up a diplomatic posting in Europe, and Adrian Rudafe will be nominated to replace him. Tornado-hit residents in Waikanae are nervously bracing for more wild weather. People living around the intersection of Queen's Road and Barrett Drive have today been cleaning up from two mini tornadoes that struck at about 7 last night. A not-for-profit KiwiSaver provider and the Shareholders Association will meet with Fletcher Building's board this week over shortages of jib plasterboard. Simplicity, a shareholder of Fletcher's, says it's hoping for a frank conversation. And over 11,000 submissions have been received in the first 4 days of consultation on the future of a stadium planned for Christchurch. The council is consulting on whether the extra money should be spent, whether the project should be paused and re-evaluated, or whether it should be scrapped altogether. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, Auckland, all lanes on the Auckland Harbour Bridge are now open, but there's a go slow in place across the bridge. All ferry services to and from Te Onewa, Northcote Point have been cancelled until further notice due to weather conditions. For Wellington, a reminder that the Terrace Tunnel on State Highway 1 will be closed tonight at 9 for maintenance. And on the west coast of the South Island, State Highway 67 between Granity to Mokihinui is now open, but it will be closing tonight from 8:30 to 11. That's the traffic. I'll have updated traffic and headlines for you at 5:40.
Thanks, Evie. Sounds like it's pretty rough out there, so do be careful. A crisis meeting's been called between KiwiSaver provider Simplicity, the Shareholders Association and Fletcher Building over concerns about the ongoing jib shortages that could hurt shareholder returns. Last week, Simplicity's social housing arm sacked Fletcher's as the jib supplier for 550 homes due to slow delivery times, saying the company caused the crisis and some builders are being pushed to the wall. Instead, it's importing plasterboard from overseas and has been contacted by 60 builders and developers wanting help to do the same. But the KiwiSaver provider also owns $35 million of Fletcher Building shares on behalf of its members. Fletcher Building says it'll be another year before its new Tauranga factory comes online, and it's working 24/7 producing jib, but nobody could see the scale of the supply issue coming. So how did it get to this? Sam Stubbs from Simplicity says it's Fletcher's hubris. Here's Fletcher's CEO, Ross Taylor.
So if I go back to 2019, that's when we made the commitment to build Tauriko. At that stage, back in 2019, consents were around 30,000 houses per annum. And so we had a capacity, as I just mentioned, to deliver for 50,000 houses. So we made a decision to invest $400 million in manufacturing in New Zealand quite some time ago. What then happened was COVID. So COVID actually caused borders to close and delays. So those delays added 6 to 12 months to the build time. What then also happened through the COVID period is what no one saw coming was then once people couldn't travel, they started investing in houses, alteration, additions, new houses, and the consents and demand for housing went from 30,000 to 50,000 quite quickly. So we were investing and have been investing ahead of all that. What no one saw coming was then the COVID issues, the delays that caused, the increase in consents, and then also through that period, the competitors in the market, or the main one, decided to withdraw and focus on their home market. So that combination has left the industry where it is right now.
So, Ross, I just want to be clear on this. Are you saying that none of this was foreseeable by you and therefore none of it is Fletcher's responsibility?
Oh, I'd never say that. I mean, I think, we're an intrinsic part of the building industry in New Zealand, and we've really got to lean into that. And that's, and I think that's why onshore manufacturing is really critical in these situations, because, you actually have some resilience. So if it was completely all import for plasterboard and all this occurred, you just don't know who would withdraw and who wouldn't withdraw. So the beauty of having our footprint here is we can really lean into the demands and start manufacturing 24/7 and really look for ways.
Should you have leaned in a little
going.
earlier, Ross? Because that is what a lot of companies are wondering. And in fact, some say that you should have seen this coming. You should have seen the number of consents rising and anticipated. And you have a social responsibility as a monopoly supplier to supply. What is your response to that?
My response to that is back in 2019, when consents were 30,000, we made the decision then to spend $400 million to add capacity to our plasterboard.
But we're in 2022 now, Ross, right? So things have moved on, and people say that businesses are going under because they can't get this product. Now, you've mentioned stockpiling, 10 to 20%. Why can't you identify who is stockpiling if indeed it is a real issue?
So all I can go on the stockpiling to start with. As I said, I think it's a side issue. It's not the main issue. And we don't sell to builders, so we don't control where that goes and who's getting what. What we do is
your merchants would be able to tell you, though, wouldn't they? So if it was a real issue, you would be able to track where the stockpile is. So do we accept that that's not one of the key issues here?
It is an issue. It's not the main issue, as I've said several times.
Okay, so failure to anticipate production needs is what people say is the real issue, and that is on Fletcher's. So could you directly address that, please?
I'll go back again. So what we have done is investing in Tauriko. We put those plans back in 2019. We could not see and could not envisage COVID and the COVID delays and the COVID effects. So once that emerged and we weren't going to get Tauriko finished until this time next year, which we're on track to do, we have done a lot to try and alleviate the issue. And what I said there is we're working our plants at 24/7 and have looked to source product offshore, but there's very limited avenues to do that because offshore markets and capacity are also limited and you can't get much in.
How is that when other companies are managing to do that? In fact, Simplicity Living announced last week that it's doing exactly that. It's going to bring in product from overseas, and I believe Nay Love has pulled the pin on supplies from you as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we're doing it ourselves. We've sourced product in 2021, that dried up because the counterparties got busy. We're also going to take deliveries through our placemaker business of further offshore product as it's freed up and that's become available. So as soon as it's been available and we've been able to get it, we're actually outsourcing it. But it's not in very large volumes because those companies offshore are still quite busy and still unable really to do much to put a very large dent in what's going on here in New Zealand.
If I wanted to get a lot of jibboard right now, how long would it take me to get it? Today I decide I need it. How long do I have to wait?
You'd have to go through the merchants, and the reason I say that is what we're giving the merchants. We don't sell direct to builders.
I understand that. Yep.
We give the volume to the merchants, and what we do is give them 2 months' notice of what those volumes, and then the merchants decide how they prioritise and who they prioritise to their customers.
It's a rationing system, right, Ross? Essentially, you're operating a rationing system right now.
We are. We're basically doing an allocation to allow people to be aware of what's going on.
And do those merchants not tell you what the flow-on effects are? Do they not give you an idea from order to delivery what builders are facing in terms of getting Jibboard? Have you got no idea how long it takes from someone wanting the Jibboard to it arriving?
Yeah, and the reason it's difficult to answer that question is the merchants will prioritise customers differently. And I've heard examples of people waiting a long time, and I've heard examples where they're getting what they need when they want it, and it depends on the relationship they have with the merchant.
Do you tell the merchants not to supply other plasterboards?
No.
How many merchants do you have exclusivity deals with?
So beyond, just to give you a sense of that, we actually, our own placemakers, our own distribution merchant, is out procuring offshore boards as we speak.
And that has only just happened because of the supply issue right now?
They've been trying for quite some time. I mean, it's been difficult to access it because
Ross,
offshore
I just want to be clear on this. Prior to you having a shortage of Jib, did they bring in other overseas plasterboard, or is it directly a consequence of you not having enough to go around?
Directly a consequence of us not having enough to go around.
So let me go back to my original question, which was in terms of merchants, how many do you have deals where they can only sell your Jibboard?
None.
None? They're all free to sell whatever plasterboard they like?
Yeah, look, it's an open market, absolutely.
And so what about rebates and other incentives for them to stock your particular product? What happens there?
Like all building products, not just plasterboard, there's volumetric rebates. I mean, the more you buy, it's a bit like going online and buying, products yourself at a retail thing. Sometimes you get this price for one, a lower price for 10. It's very, very much the same.
And what about selling below cost to keep competitors out of the market? Do you do that too?
Never.
Never?
Never.
Do you accept, because of your hold on the market, and it's said to be around 94-95%, that it is incredibly difficult to get real competition when it comes to plasterboard in this country? Do you accept that?
No.
Why not?
Well, what we do with all of our building products is we compete against imports generally. There's a dynamic here in New Zealand, given the size of the market, that you need enough scale to be able to build a big enough factory to get to get cost efficiencies that can allow you to compete with the big manufacturers overseas. So what occurs is even the $400 million plant we're building for wallboards is, when you look globally, not the largest plant, but it needs to be around that big to be even competitive. So what happens is you get these plants built overseas in Asia, they have different labour costs, they're much, much larger, and they have a real cost advantage. So we have to stay right on our toes here as we manufacture plasterboard or other products in New Zealand to make sure we can stay competitive. And there are no tariffs, no barriers to entry to products in New Zealand, which I think is a healthy thing for the economy and keeping local manufacturers, on their toes and competitive. So that opportunity exists for plasterboard, it exists for cement, it exists for insulation products, it exists for all products.
Does it though, Ross? Because I'm wondering, is there a bias to Jibboard in the system when it comes to regional authorities like councils and also architect and design industry? Is there a bias towards Jibboard because of what Sam Stubbs would call a masterclass in corporate lobbying from Fletcher's?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, let's start with we compete on our customer service and product quality. And I think our customer service is very strong, and I think our quality and range is also very strong, and we're happy to compete on that basis. When it comes to the lobbying comment is just inaccurate. There's five board brands that comply with standards in the Australian New Zealand standards here in New Zealand already, so there's already a market there for that. The only thing that is unique to our boards is we've got a brands accreditation for a system, and that system is a bracing system in housing. And what that means is you can use our board if you use it the right way. That's our system the right way. That means you can count it as bracing in a house. And the advantage of having a house with jib board as bracing is it means you can have a cheaper structure. You can brace it any way you
There
like.
are other plasterboard products that offer that. They offer plasterboard as lining as well as bracing. So I'm wondering, you mentioned there are other plasterboard brands, but they do make up only about 6% of the market. Do you think that is partly because of this, inherent bias in the system towards jib board? I mean, for example, here's an example. Building certification forms pre-fill in jib. Some councils will not allow substitutions. So if an architect or a designer has written jib, even though there is an approved product that they could use, plasterboard, there's a big process, which is more bureaucracy, which makes it very difficult to make a change. Do you accept that those things work in favour of jib board?
So I'll go back again. I think the product range we have, there's 10 different types of boards. The systems we have and the service we provide are why we get recommended. I actually think others can compete and they can bring board in and they can do the same thing if they want to get their service levels and their product ranges to that level.
So the government has intervened in the supermarket sector because of a lack of competition, and there's a duopoly there, right? You've got a monopoly, really, haven't you, on jib board? An effective monopoly, haven't you?
Well, I go back to what I said at the end of the day. We've got a very strong market share, as you've mentioned. We've earned that.
It's effectively a monopoly, isn't it, Ross? If you're straight up about it.
I will be straight up about it. We've earned that market share. We still have to compete. We still have to compete against the boards that get imported here, and that happens every day of the week. And as I said, you have to stay on your toes. There's a lot of manufacturing production out in the world, and there's a lot more scale and a lot more offers out there, and you absolutely have to stay on your toes.
So what do you say to the more than 60 builders and developers who have contacted Simplicity Living and want information on how they too can outsource plasterboard because they're not happy with what they're getting from you?
I absolutely accept that. I mean, they need plasterboard to get their facilities built, and if they're not getting it through their merchants, then you've got to look at other alternatives. In my mind, what I can say though is that we're going to work very hard to get as much product out there, and then we will have this solved this time next year when we open Tauriko.
So this time next year, I'm told 93 building businesses have gone out of business already, and some of them attribute it to supply issues, including for plasterboard. So another year, how many more do you reckon might go out?
Look, all I can say is I really get it. It's tough out there in the building sector because of those things. The building supply, the global supply chain, the resources and inflation. It's a really difficult combination out there right now.
So just circling back to where we started from, what responsibility does Fletcher's take for the predicament that the industry finds itself in now with plasterboard shortages? What responsibility do you take?
As I said, I think we've really got to work hard and work our factories 24/7 and do everything we can to source product to make this transition as we get capacity into the market as seamless as possible.
And that's Ross Taylor, Fletcher Building CEO. Love your feedback on that one. Text us on 2101. It is 37 minutes past 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And let's stick with the theme. Business news now. Ko taku hoa inai ko Giles Beckford, who joins us live from Wellington. So Giles, Fletcher Building on a bit of a charm offensive. Read the jib board supply issue, talking to media today, but also this meeting with Simplicity coming up as well.
Yeah, although he wasn't going to concede that it's their fault, and they've benefited from a confluence of conditions, whether it be supply chain shortages, the fact that one of their competitors actually upped sticks and left, that was the Australian firm Boral, They quit local jib board production last year. And he makes the claim about hoarding. Well, I have to say one of the builders doing work in our building here in RNZ House a few months ago was telling me, well, there's a warehouse tucked away in one of the industrial areas here. They've got close to $500,000 worth of jib board tucked away. They could see it coming, and they just took the appropriate precautions. So, yeah, a lot of things have worked in Fletcher Challenger's favour in this one, as much as they don't want to actually wear the blame for it. One of the interesting things about Friday's meeting between Simplicity and Fletcher Building is the involvement of the Shareholders Association. Now, you mentioned in that interview how Sam Stubbs from Simplicity was saying we've got $35 million worth of shares and you should take note of us as shareholders. Interestingly, the Shareholders Association says, well, we've got actually similar interests, because if the reputation of Fletcher Building takes a hit from this, and there are questions about the way the company is being run at the highest level, and it starts to impact on shareholder returns, then they're the people we're looking after. So that's why the Shareholders Association is getting involved. They're wondering whether the Fletcher board has learnt the lessons from 4 or 5 years ago. You remember back in 2017, massive losses, right down in asset values and the like. The chair of the board, Sir Ralph Norris, and a couple of other directors fell on their swords as a result of that. That's when the big investment funds started to get really antsy about the way the company was being run, and there had to be a public sacrifice, and that's what happened. Shareholders Association Oliver Mander head said to me this afternoon, he says, we're making sure that we're not seeing history again.
And very quickly, Giles, people are unimpressed with banks as KiwiSaver providers.
Yeah,
What's the haps there?
This came out from a consumer magazine survey done, and the banks, the main banks, the retail banks, all rated really at the bottom. ANZ and ASB, the two biggest banks with KiwiSaver funds. People not engaged with them, not hearing about what their funds are worth, the fees that they're being charged, not happy about the performance that they're seeing there. Been in touch with the Financial Markets Authority, which oversees this whole area and has been putting a lot of effort into trying to educate people. It says, look, the banks may be not doing a good job, but it's just as much on the investors to knock on the door and say, oi, what's going on? What are you charging me? What's my fund worth? What are you doing about it? So all important questions. It's a little bit on both sides of the coin there.
Joggers on, Giles, for the market numbers.
All I can say is worst day in nearly 4 months for the share market. It was a bit truncated because the Australian investment scene has closed down today for a holiday, so that's limited trade, but the top 50 index down 211 points. That's 1.9%. The market's now at its lowest level since mid-2020. And looking at the currency, Kiwi is 63.5 US cents and 90.2 Australian.
Thanks, Giles. That's our business editor, Giles Beckford. It is 20 to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora anō. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch about the situation with jib supply or plasterboard. Let us know what your experience is. Are you waiting in a queue? Where are you at in terms of building or renovating? We'd love to hear your story. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's head to the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced a cabinet reshuffle this afternoon following 2 departures. Chris Farfoy will leave Parliament to spend time with his family, and Trevor Mallard will step down in mid-August to take up a diplomatic posting in Europe. Emergency management staff have been meeting with coastal Bulla residents this afternoon, helping those who wish to evacuate to higher ground. Mayor Jamie Klein says the region is preparing for another rough night with more high swells, strong wind and rain forecast. Fletcher Building says it's ramping up jib production and importing plasterboard to try to meet the critical shortage in the building sector. Chief Executive Ross Taylor told Checkpoint nobody could have foreseen the global supply problems alongside a big jump in building consents during the COVID pandemic. However, he accepts his company's near monopoly in the plasterboard market and the responsibility to meet demand. Two new initiatives are being launched in schools to try and combat the rise of vaping. The latest Asthma and Respiratory Foundation and Secondary Principals Association survey has found 27% of young people have vaped in the last 7 days. Foundation Chief Executive Letitia Harding says New Zealand has been slow to regulate vaping and the message that it's safe has been normalised. And over 11,000 submissions have been received in the first 4 days of consultation on the future of a stadium planned for Christchurch. Those are the headlines. Looking to traffic in the main centres. Auckland, transit across the Harbour Bridge is slower than your usual Monday with a speed restriction in place. Rough weather on the Waitemata has also shut down ferry services to and from Te Oniwa, Northcote Point until further notice. Allow for longer travel times really across the country because snow, fallen trees and slips look to be affecting many areas and detours will be necessary. I'll update you with the latest news and weather at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa. New faces, old heads and a certain rugby league convert. As usual, there's plenty to talk about in the first All Blacks squad of the year. The 36-strong group will host Ireland, one of 3 teams they lost to last year for 3 tests next month. Now, Clay Wilson was at today's announcement in South Auckland.
There was a strong Pasifika flavour to today's All Blacks announcement at the Whale o Samoa in Mangere. So it was fitting the biggest oohs and ahs were reserved for a newcomer of Samoan heritage who grew up in that very community.
Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, Blues and Auckland.
Coach Ian Foster says the All Blacks' latest league convert and former Warriors captain has come on in leaps and bounds.
If you look from the start of the campaign to now, he's improving. And so he's improving in a whole lot of aspects. And he's still, I think by his own admission, he'll have some areas that he's got to get a bit better at. But we believe the time's right. Bring him in and let's start working with him.
Joining Tuivasa-Sheck among the 6 uncapped players, Blues teammate Stephen Perofeta, Crusaders outside back Lester Whainganuku, Chiefs forwards Aidan Ross and Peter Gus Sowakula, and Highlanders halfback Folau Fakatava. Having overcome injury and eligibility issues, Tongan-born Fakatava says it's special to be named alongside fellow Highlanders halfback Aaron Smith.
Coming from Tonga, Aaron was my idol. I'm really competitive, same as him, so we were pushing each other to our best, and obviously he's the best in the world.
But Fakatava's inclusion means no space for Brad Weber or 78-test Hurricane TJ Perenara. Foster didn't want to comment specifically on Perenara's exclusion, but indicates the door remains open.
I had 9 conversations yesterday with All Blacks from last year who weren't named today, and they were really tough. You could feel the passion on the end of the phone call, and each, I know, will have a desire to get back in here, and we've got to make sure that we're part of that plan by giving them the direction that they need.
As for on-field direction, Sam Cane regains the captaincy after missing most of 2021 through injury. Injury and illness has also hampered the Chiefs flanker this year, creating no shortage of public debate about his credentials as All Blacks skipper. Foster says it was not really a debate among the selectors.
I love the fact that people care and everyone's got their favourites. 2 years ago, I signalled that I felt that Sam Cane was the All Black captain. Do we trust him on the big stage? Yes, we do. I love his leadership and I think he's the right person for the job.
For his part, Cane is happy to have the job back. And with a team like Ireland inbound, the All Black skipper says there's not much room for the slow starts we've often seen in this first series of the season.
I've almost pretty much hit our number. It hasn't been easy. We've lost them in Ireland twice now and once in Chicago. And it's been 10 years since they came out here, so it's going to be a real unique series.
Fans have just 19 days to wait to watch this new All Black squad in action. The sold-out first test at Eden Park is on July 2nd.
It is 13 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time to get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about the situation with Fletcher's and the problem getting jib board. Fletcher's needs to be broken up. They have had New Zealand by the proverbials for too long. They have made sure we can only buy their products for decades, says this listener. Someone else says you can buy it on AliExpress. Fletcher's problem is mismanagement. That's Jay. Stuart, tuning in from Auckland. Stuart says Fletcher's could not forecast the effect of COVID. Certainly, I totally agree, but didn't COVID reduce the demand for jib board? Because builders couldn't work. Surely ignoring the effect of COVID, the demand would have been even greater than it actually is. So shouldn't Fletcher's be asking their forecasters some very pointed questions? Another person says, I'm self-employed and work on my own in Te Anau on construction maintenance. Can't get any jib till October or November. Can't even order any, so not happy at all. I have 4 bathrooms to reline, so need Aqualine. And this one in a similar vein. I got told by Bunnings Lyle Bay today that I won't get jib for a project for 4 months at least. Get in line and wait. Meanwhile, prices go up. Standard sheet of plasterboard in New Zealand now is $30, in Oz, $16. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101. There's no plan B if Christchurch's hotly debated multi-use arena is ultimately scrapped, according to the Crusaders CEO. The proposal's been passed to the public for their say on whether Christchurch City Council should top up the cost after a $150 million blowout was revealed earlier this month. Despite their reputation as rugby mad, not all Cantabs are keen on the stadium, saying there's greater need in areas like the city's east. And nearby businesses appear split, some telling Checkpoint they opened on the promise of the stadium, while others say it won't fix short-term pain down a deserted end of town. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nate McKinnon.
It's set to be Christchurch's field of dreams. Right now, it's a bureaucratic nightmare. The city's would-be stadium. Right now, a patch of dirt hogging a CBD block surrounded by 4 streets. It's the political football that's once again been punted back to the drawing board. So Checkpoint's decided to do some early consultation in Christchurch, and it's not necessarily what outsiders might think.
I live in Brighton. It's pretty smashed up after earthquakes still, and a lot of the other places are, so yeah, we could do with some money spent on things like roads and stuff like that.
I reckon we just need to get into it really, get it done, move on, be brave and build the thing.
I don't think it's a priority. We need to fix the basic infrastructure and that dreadful smell coming out of Bromley, which thank God I don't live in.
So a quick, unscientific consultation tells us, despite what you might think, not everyone in the Garden City is rugby mad, and not everyone thinks getting the likes of Ed Sheeran to Christchurch is worth just south of $700 million. But one man who does want to dance with Ed and root for the Red and Blacks under a roof is this guy, Crusaders boss Colin Mansbridge. He says the conversation shouldn't be one or the other. The city can clean up the likes of East Christchurch while also constructing a longed-for multi-use arena.
The reason we've got to kick on is if we keep doing this, we're almost like as leaders, we're almost like whipping the community. We're assaulting the community every time we have this conversation. We can do both. We can prioritise differently, and we just need to get on and do both, and we need to get the thing built.
So best case, come completion of consultation, is councillors opting to kick on. But what about the alternatives? Failure to approve the bigger budget, a return to the drawing board, scrapping the stadium altogether?
I don't know. There isn't really a plan B. We've been fully invested in a multi-use arena for ever since it was first mentioned. And in some respects, if we got to this point and it was no, and we were into worst case, we'd be pretty gutted because we probably should have been working on plan B.
No plan B for one simple reason. Belief plan A would be delivered.
We trusted in the same way as all of those central city businesses did. We trusted, and we trusted central government when they talked about the blueprint, and we trusted local government when they've talked about we need a multi-use arena. So it feel a bit like trust has been broken.
So we decide to visit some of those businesses Mr Mansbridge mentions, heading down a deserted eastern end of Litchfield Street. Here we get talking to kebab house owner Gurpreet Singh. It's nearly lunchtime, but his business is deserted. Next door, some shops are shut with stacked chairs. Others sport for lease signs.
We're really looking forward to start the construction soon, because this area totally depends upon the people for office and for the construction. And yeah, that's our only hope. Otherwise, this business, like all of this business, won't gonna survive if the construction for the stadium won't start.
But there are other perspectives too. Gong Din is busy working in his eatery, Banh Mi M, but doing business here is a battle.
I don't think the stadium will help the business here, to be honest. Yeah, I think they need something else. It's not the stadium. Yeah, like a high-end mall or something like that. I think some can attract the people straight away.
And that illustrates the real mood here. The sporting sector, business leaders are loud arena advocates. But on these CBD streets, debate, division, well, it runs deep.
From my point of view, there are a lot of more important things in Christchurch. It's good to have a stadium and a functioning one, but we might not be able to get the gold-plated one.
Bite the bullet, get on with it. I really want the stadium. I love my sports, I love music, and I want to see some good bands here.
I think it's bigger fish to fry, to be candid.
A political football kicked back to the public arena. In a month, it'll be upstairs for a decision. 16 councillors, 1 mayor, with the final say. Keep the plan in play or send it to the bin.
And you can check out the video version of that story filmed by Nate McKinnon. It'll be on our webpage. An organisation which provides health education to young people says some rangatahi who vape are consuming as much nicotine as someone smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. The Life Education Trust says schools are crying out for help because they're dealing with young people with full-on dependency issues. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
The latest Asthma and Respiratory Foundation and Secondary School Principals Association survey found 27% of young people have vaped in the last 7 days. And the ASH Year 10 snapshot shows a dramatic increase for regular vaping from 12% of students in 2019 to 20% last year. Life Education Trust Chief Executive John O'Connell says vaping has become an epidemic and the amount of nicotine being consumed is horrendous.
You know, basically smoking with young people had disappeared completely, whereas now we're back with vaping, back around where we were 20 years ago. And I think the real issue is the nicotine, and people just completely unaware of the really high nicotine rates that some of these young people are having. You know, it's equivalent to sort of a pack or a pack and a half a day in terms of, equivalent to cigarettes.
John O'Connell says schools are asking the Trust for help because they are dealing with young people hooked on nicotine.
You know, schools were dealing initially and responding as a behavioural issue, and a couple of years ago we were reading things in the media about children being stood down and things like that. Schools are now recognising that it is actually a health dependency, so the reason why they're bunking class and hiding in the toilets or whatever is because of the craving for the nicotine. And schools are crying out for support at the moment.
He says New Zealand should follow Australia's lead, where vaping is clearly a smoking cessation product and vape fluid is only available on prescription. The Asthma and Respiratory Foundation teamed up with the Trust to develop Behind the Scenes, a theatrical production on vaping and peer pressure. And the foundation, which set up the Don't Get Sucked In website in 2019, has just released Spotlight on Vaping, a series of videos designed to be a conversation starter about vaping. Its chief executive, Letitia Harding, says New Zealand has been slow to regulate vaping and the message that it's safer than smoking has been normalised.
That means that teenagers have heard, through your sort of, teenage years that it's safe than smoking must be safe. But it's not. Vaping itself does have health issues, and especially nicotine vapes, which we know the majority are vaping, is highly addictive. And so that's where we have gone wrong.
Sue Bass is the Deputy Principal at Reefton Area School. She says vaping is all pervasive.
It's huge, and it's students from year 8, probably 12-year-olds up, are vaping, and we contact parents, and parents have no awareness of the health issues, the legal issues.
Sue Bass says Life Education Trust presentation at its school was an eye-opener for staff and students.
I don't think any of us knew the actual nicotine content in vapes. People think they're safe. They think they're just a toy almost.
Most of these Year 13 students at New Plymouth Girls High School had vaped.
I think it's pretty generally accepted.
Yeah, just in social situations again. It was alright, nothing too crazy.
Yeah, I feel like just because everyone else does it, it's just something you do, I guess.
No, but I have been offered before.
Yeah, just in a social gathering.
No, not unless you count being trapped in a small room with someone who won't stop vaping.
The teenagers reckon most of their peers are not aware vaping might be addictive.
Everyone kind of thinks they'll vape, but they're not going to get addicted. It's not them getting addicted when really you think about it. They are.
Yeah, I don't think they're aware of how high the factors are.
But I think everyone's always it's only whatever percentage it is. I don't think no one knows how high it is at all.
I don't reckon, especially the younger people.
Not until they actually experience it themselves, the addiction.
Kind of bragging rights for some, I guess. People who are oh yeah, I'm addicted, and they just a throwaway.
The 6-part Spotlight on Vaping video series is now available on the Don't Get Sucked In website.
Okay, to some of your feedback now, and it's pouring in on Plasterboard and our interview with the Fletcher's boss. This listener says lame excuses provided by Fletcher's. If some builders can plan by stockpiling a year in advance, Fletcher's, with all of their advisors and forecasters, missed it. Surely heads ought to roll at Fletcher's. Sandy reckons architects should foot some of the blame, stipulating jib in house builds. They should have known there were other options rather than giving Fletcher's carte blanche, says this person. Another says no one could have predicted the trouble with Fletcher's jib monopoly, especially if they haven't done basics, fourth form year 10 economics, and then an acronym there that I shan't read out. Another person says Ross Taylor sounds like when he went to the Donald Trump School of Gaslighting, been working with jib for 35 years. The words service and Windstone warbirds do not belong in the same sentence. Another says jib should only be issued once a council pre-line inspection is completed, unlike the Fletcher's Living development highlighted on YouTube, says Frank. And that's about whether Fletcher was giving preferential deliveries of jib board to their own developments. Another listener says it's a monopoly with Fletcher jib. That's why we have this issue.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Prime Minister has unveiled a significant shake-up of her cabinet lineup, triggered by the departure of a senior minister. Chris Whāwhoi is leaving politics to spend more time with his family, and Parliament's Speaker, Trevor Mallard, will also leave to take up a diplomatic post in Europe. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
Jacinda Ardern says Mr Mallard flagged with her after the 2020 election that he wanted to transition out of the role of Speaker over the course of this term. Adrian Rurafe will be nominated to replace him. Kitty Allen picks up the Justice portfolio from Mr Whāwhoi, and Michael Wood becomes Immigration Minister. Chris Hipkins will take over as Police Minister following mounting pressure on Portal Williams amid a spate of gang violence.
The cabinet vacancy left by Chris Whāwhoi will be filled by Priyanka Radhakrishnan, who has been a minister outside cabinet until now. Adding to her current portfolios of youth, the community and voluntary sector, and diversity, inclusion and ethnic communities, she picks up associate workplace relations and safety with a focus on migrant exploitation.
I've strengthened and deepened the relationships with various communities across those portfolios, and it's great to see that that's been recognised and that I will continue to advocate for them in Cabinet.
A West Coast resident had a terrifying experience this afternoon when her car was shunted sideways off the road by wild weather. State Highway 67 along the Buller coast was closed for much of the day, while strong winds and high swells whipped waves and debris across the road and into properties. Buller Mayor Jamie Klein says thankfully the driver was okay.
Local district nursing staff was on her routine rounds, and I'm not sure if it was the waves coming across the state highway or the wind, but either way her vehicle ended up in the reeds, well off the road actually, and she had to be helped back to dry ground.
Jamie Klein says 7 to 8 metre swells are forecast again just before 10 tonight during high tide. The Auckland Harbour Bridge has had to be closed for brief periods several times today because of strong wind gusts. Met Service meteorologist Angus Hines says a weather station on top of the bridge recorded gusts of 104 kilometres an hour earlier today.
There's been some very strong wind around the Auckland region today, and it's sort of been coming in spurts. We've been having these very strong gusts associated with the lines of thunderstorms that have been rolling through the region. Some exposed parts of the area have had gusts well over 100 kilometres an hour.
Angus Hines says the region can expect more rain and wind into the evening. Meanwhile, State Highway 8 through the Lindis Pass will remain closed until at least midday tomorrow morning. Waka Kotahi says it won't be reopened until maintenance crews have ensured it's safe for motorists following heavy snowfall at the summit. The lawyer for a Southland woman accused of murder says she admits lying to the police, but she didn't commit murder. Sandy Graham is on trial in the High Court in Invercargill for the murder of Dale Watene on April the 16th, 2020. Her lawyer, Sarah Saunderson-Warner, says she and Mr Watene argued and fought on the night in question. She says Mr Watene placed the firearm in his mouth and a terrible accident occurred. A bipartisan group of senators in the US has reached agreement on gun safety law reform. They include tougher background checks for younger gun buyers, but not a ban on assault weapons. The BBC's David Willis has more.
Given the deep divisions that exist over how to address one of this country's most intractable problems, any agreement of this kind is remarkable and could form the template for the first gun control legislation this country has seen in decades. The agreement they've reached doesn't go as far as President Biden and others would have liked, but he nonetheless called it an important step in the right direction, whilst gun safety activists said they hoped the measures would unlock a new era of bipartisanship on the issue of gun violence.
Firefighters say their strike for better pay and safer conditions will continue until they get what they're asking for. The Professional Firefighters Union today began a partial strike it says has no end date. National Secretary Watty Watson says Fire and Emergency isn't paying them enough but has also failed to provide safe work equipment.
They've just had to take a whole category of hose off all the trucks because it has been failing. And we've had instances of firefighters inside a burning building where the hose has failed, which is the most serious situation a firefighter could be in.
The union says the strike will affect administrative procedures but not emergency response. And a Tauranga college says it will discipline students who abused fellow students holding an LGBT plus rights rally at the school last week. Bethlehem College says the students made offensive comments and threw 2 pieces of fruit at the silent demonstrators. It says reports of the incident prompted vitriolic messages about the school and offensive emails to the chair of its board. The college says it doesn't tolerate bullying and expects its students to tolerate the viewpoints of others. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, the wrangle over pig farrowing crates.
The direction of travel for animal welfare, how we use animals, our engagement, whether it's a companion animal, a racehorse or a farmed animal, the movement and the conversations and the traction around these conversations are moving quickly at the moment.
The Detail on Apple, Spotify, RNZ or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're back on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen shortly. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Watches and warnings are in place for heavy rain, snow, severe gales and thunderstorms in many parts of the country. For all of the North Island, except from Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers, some heavy with squally thunderstorms and hail, easing this evening. Snow to above 1,000 metres, affecting the Desert Road today. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, showers clearing this evening. Isolated showers are possible south of Napier tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, heavy showers and thunderstorms, squally in the west, clearing for most places this evening. A few showers are possible tomorrow afternoon. Looking at Canterbury, a few showers today and snow above 800 metres, fine spells increasing tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers, snow above about 300 to 400 metres. For Bulla and Westland, isolated showers today, becoming widespread tomorrow and some are heavy. And for Reakohu, the Chatham Islands, showers with possible thunderstorms. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll have the latest headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. To weather now, and in a few words, it's complete crud pretty much everywhere. Bulla Civil Defence has set up its Emergency Operations Centre to deal with the wild weather hitting the region. A neighbourhood in Waikanae has been in clean-up mode today after 2 tornadoes hit the town overnight. At Piha Beach on Auckland's west coast, waves have been getting up to 9 metres high. And speaking of high winds have caused the harbour bridge to open and close several times today. And there's been more than 100,000 lightning strikes in 7 days. Wow, is that right? That's right, isn't it? Yeah, I'm being told by the producer. Absolutely right. That's a lot of lightning. And Met Service duty forecaster Lee Matheson joins us now. Hi, Lee.
Kia ora.
It's not great out there, so what should we expect overnight and where?
Well, overnight we've actually got a southerly pushing up the South Island. So in the South Island, things are starting to quieten down, but the North Island has still got those squally thunderstorms and strong westerlies coming through tonight. However, the good news is that they should start to ease through into tomorrow.
So how bad is it going to be in terms of the wind, because it's been howling up here today, and also the intensity of the rain?
Well, it's really the squally thunderstorms that bring those short, intense bursts of rain. We're not expecting any more widespread heavy rain because it's starting to push away now out of the Kapiti region. So the rain warning there is starting to come to its end. We still, however, have a good line of thunderstorms just pushing up into the Manawatu, and up. I can see a few isolated thunderstorms also around through the Waikato. So those regions will still be seeing short, intense bursts through this evening into tonight. However, as we get into tomorrow, we will start to see these thunderstorms ease off. And for those who are wanting a nice quiet night's sleep from the thunder and yeah, maybe their pets are a bit stressed out, might be pleased to know that we are expecting finally an end to the persistent thunderstorms.
I mean, at one point today you had about 3 dozen warnings for around the country, more than. I mean, is this record-setting stuff, what you're seeing?
It's really hard. It's certainly across just anecdotally across the office, we've all been saying, is this the longest period we've seen with such persistent thunderstorm activity? I don't think I've seen it in my time, in my career, but then it's always, your memory can get a bit weak sometimes. But it is certainly unusual for such a long, persistent period of unsettled activity and widespread thunderstorm activity.
So, Lee, who sits there counting all the lightning strikes?
We have a lightning network, and it's actually the computer when it processes all the signals. It's the computer that counts them all up.
Wow, it must be running on overtime at the moment with all the work it's having to do. Hey, are we having more tornadoes, or are we just noticing them more?
We're probably noticing them more. The tricky thing about tornadoes, and certainly today when we had a couple of sort of anecdotal reports, is that firstly they're quite small in New Zealand and they're quite hard for us to see on the radar. What's really great is if people can, get a photo of these things. Also, they can be mistaken for downbursts, which are also equally dangerous. Strong winds that instead of a swirling tornado, it's a big flood of air that pushes down and can actually roll at its leading edge, which can actually kind of, if you saw it on the ground, you might think it was a tornado because the air is still turning. So sometimes it downbursts, especially when we have very strong winds. Downbursts are quite common. So sometimes it could be a downburst, which is equally damaging, but also we do get these little tornadoes.
So, Lee, if someone's got fab footage, where should they send it to?
Oh, just send it to our netservice.com or onto our Facebook. We love seeing the pictures It also really helps for us to confirm what people are reporting to us.
And Lee, just out of personal self-interest, what's happening with the temperature? Because I noticed a 5 degrees drop in Auckland, not wanting to sound too soft, but so what's happening with the temperature?
Yeah, it is going down. Probably in the far north, not quite so much as it is down the South Island and into the lower North Island as we see this trough move through tonight and tomorrow. I mean, the South Island certainly definitely cooling down. But you will notice that over the next few days that it's not going to cool down much more, and certainly for people in Auckland, but noticeably cooler than it has been.
So waiting till Wednesday, Lee, for something a little bit better than what we've got. We've got to hold out till Wednesday.
Yes, certainly expect the wind, expect the shower activity to settle, the thunderstorm activity to settle, and the winds to slowly ease off as you get into Thursday and really quietening down on Friday.
All right, fingers crossed. Thanks for joining us. That's Lee Matheson, who's the Met Service duty forecaster. Auckland's Smith & Co department store was hit by an audacious smash and grab overnight. 2 of its big storefront windows have been smashed, with thieves taking what they could before fleeing. It's the latest in a spate of burglaries hitting Auckland retailers. Mohammed Al-Fishat reports.
Smith & Co.'s is known for its Queen Street window displays, but today there's nothing but shattered glass and clothes scattered across the 142-year-old store. Auckland pedestrians say it's getting absurd.
It's sad, mate. As I said, it's not cool. As I said, it's one of those things that you just don't want to see when you wake up at this time in the morning going off to work and you see another smash and grab. It's just nothing you want to see, eh?
The police say the thieves hit at about 11 o'clock last night, smashing the windows with what they're describing only as a weapon. It was not a ram raid. Police say that several people went into the store and stole a range of items before fleeing in 3 vehicles. Neighbouring shop owners are now afraid they could be next.
Scared because we're so close. I'd be scared it could happen here as well. And luckily that was at night when there was no one in the store. But it's scary to think it could also happen in the daytime, and there's nothing we can do when it actually happens.
This downtown commuter says it's becoming demoralising.
I think it's really unfortunate. You know, Smith & Co.'s is a pretty classic piece of Auckland's retail, and it's a real shame.
First Retail Group is a consultancy providing advice and expertise to retailers. Its managing director, Chris Wilkinson, is concerned not enough action is being taken to prevent similar crimes.
The only way that things can be managed in the interim is to have some dedicated security that can be supported across these town and city centres, where there can be maybe some early warnings of this type of activity that could potentially happen.
Mr. Wilkinson says the situation requires an immediate joint approach that involves the police and social agencies.
4 years of hell at the hands of his foster father. This is the evidence of a man who is now deceased, which has been shared at the inquiry into abuse in care, and it's focused this week on state foster care. Our reporter Andrew McRae is at the hearing in Auckland.
Hemi McCallum was made a state ward at the age of 2 and moved from one foster home to another. In 1973, at the age of 9, he went to a placement in Southland, and the worst of his nightmares started. His niece, Tanya Tonga, read his evidence to the hearing.
I would refer to my foster father as an alcoholic, gambling nutcase.
He was hit regularly by his foster father.
He would use his fists, kick me with steel-capped boots, hit me with hunks of steel, wood, chains, deer antlers, pipes, straps, the vacuum cleaner tube, and dog collars. Anything he could get his hands on.
The beatings were on a daily basis.
If he grew tired and was panting from beating me, he would get his wife to beat me. If she was too tired or not around, he would get his daughter to beat me.
Mr. McCullum said he lived in fear of being killed by his foster father. One time the man was showing off to a group of hunters.
The son and I were down on the riverbank, putting bricks on a walkway for them to shoot at. And my foster father was shooting them out of my hand from 300 yards away with his high-powered rifle. That was really very frightening and added to my belief that he would eventually that he could or eventually would kill me.
He said his life was saved by a social worker who visited the home and saw for herself what was going on. Something triggered his foster father in front of her.
Lucy jumped in and intervened. She stood in front of me to protect me and tried to calm things down. Then she got me in her car and we left. We had to stop down the road a bit because she was shaking so much. She burst out crying. She had seen a glimpse of the man I had seen every day for 4 years.
Mr. McCullum was then placed with the family and spent a happy time. But later, as an adult, his life went off the rails due to alcohol and violence. This he attributes to 4 violent years in that one foster home.
And apologies for some of the technical issues with Andrew's story there. It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A few of you getting in touch about the Christchurch Stadium. This person says scrap the cathedral and build the stadium. I wonder how that'll go down. 2101 on text. George reckons I can build the stadium for much less. Interesting, George. How long would that take you? On the cabinet reshuffle, Lloyd's got in touch to say, I've been waiting for the opportunity to put up my hand to be Speaker of the House. How hard is it to sit there all day saying, order, order, order? Yeah, interesting, Lloyd. Maybe chuck in your resume. On Trevor Mallard getting an overseas job, this person says Mallard getting a junket job is a joke. John's got in touch saying Puto Williams may not have had the confidence of the public after National's gaslighting campaign, but she oversaw a much greater increase in police numbers, police pay and resources for police in 5 years than National did in 9 years. Another listener says the attacks on Puto Williams were typical male chauvinism. And a couple of you are concerned about Chris Hipkins. Hipkins' move to police minister shows how valuable he is, but also how few capable people there are in this cabinet. The Prime Minister's mini tornado should have relieved Mahuta of her foreign affairs portfolio. Another similar one says Chris Hipkins is one of the government's best ministers, but he is just getting more and more of a workload. It's not fair for him. He's only human and can only do so much before he cracks under the strain. And they also add Nanaya Mahuta needs to go. In the United States, a cross-party group of senators has agreed to a deal for potential legislation on gun safety. The measures would include tougher background checks and cracking down on illegal gun purchases, though they won't look at banning assault weapons. It could be the most significant gun control legislation in decades. Here's the ABC's Carrington Clark.
Thousands of people have taken to the streets of major US cities, calling on politicians to step up to the plate and enact gun reform.
What do we want? Gun control! Where do we want it? Now!
A bipartisan group of US senators, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats, say they've heard the demand and agreed on a framework for new gun safety laws. The gunmen who carried out the massacres in Buffalo, New York and Uvalde, Texas in recent weeks were both in their teens. Under the proposal, there would be enhanced background checks for people under the age of 21. Democratic Senator Chris Coons from Connecticut says although many Democrats would prefer an outright ban on the sale of assault weapons, the proposal is better than not doing anything.
Let's explore what's possible, what can get more than 10 Republican votes, because frankly, to come up short in this moment, to deliver literally nothing again, was just too hard a prospect to contemplate.
The framework wants to leave much of the responsibility of gun reform to the states. It includes using federal money to provide financial support for so-called state red flag laws, where law enforcement or families can ask courts to remove firearms from people if they pose a risk to themselves or to others. The Republican governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, told Fox News he's open to some reform, but says defining which weapons should be restricted is fraught.
I haven't seen a definition that works yet, but we will look at that. But I think that what you're going to see coming out of the Senate is something that we need to respond to as governors.
The US President Joe Biden says the Senate framework appears to be a step in the right direction, though thinks more will be needed. The House has already passed its own gun law reform bill, which goes much further. High-profile progressive Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says she would look carefully at the text of the bill, but she was keen to do at least something on background checks.
Well, I think when it comes to guns, we have to look at all of the options that we have at the table, recognizing that the Senate simply right now isn't capable of, I believe, passing the comprehensive legislation in all forms that is needed.
If the Senate is able to come up with an agreement that involves background checks and the strengthening of red flag laws, it would signify the biggest national achievement on gun law reform in decades. But the devil will be in the detail, and once the text is released, the National Rifle Association will have a target to aim for.
To Australia now, and Ash Barty, Shane Warne and some of the top health experts who led the country through the pandemic have been recognised in the country's Queen's Birthday Honours list. The ABC's Gavin Coote has this report.
Ash Barty is the Australian Open champion.
After winning a third Grand Slam singles title at this year's Australian Open, tennis star Ash Barty shocked the sporting world when she announced her retirement in March.
The time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams and to put the rackets down.
The 26-year-old has now been appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia, or AO, for her distinguished service to tennis and to youth development programs. Also appointed an AO is the late cricket legend Shane Warne, the king of spin who died suddenly in March, is being recognised for his service as a cricketer, role model and commentator, and for his charity and philanthropic activities. His father, Keith Warne, says the Queen's Birthday Honour is a fitting accolade.
It recognises that Shane was much more than an incredible cricketer. He really was a selfless and remarkable man who always looked to support those less fortunate.
992 Australians have been named in this year's Queen's Birthday Honours list. Just 8 have received the highest honour, the Companion of the Order of Australia, or AC. Among them, the former Deputy Prime Minister and National Party leader John Anderson for eminent service to regional development and leadership in agricultural research and food security.
It's not really just about me. It's about an incredible number of Australian organisations and individuals who do so much, not just in Australia, but internationally.
46% of this year's recipients are women. That's the second highest percentage since the system began in 1975. Carmen Lawrence was the first female Premier of an Australian state in WA and later became a federal minister in the Keating government. She's been appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for her work in government and for service in conservation and the arts.
And I'm very keen, I guess, like a lot of Australians, to see the work that conservationists do recognised and responded to, whether it's on climate change or protecting plants and animals.
There are 200 new members of the Order of Australia, including Victoria's Emergency Management Commissioner Andrew Crisp, former world #1 golfer Adam Scott, and Serena Lillywhite, who was CEO of Transparency International Australia, has become a prominent voice in the push for more accountability in business and politics.
The recent election showed really clearly that the public is concerned about integrity, and so to have played a part in getting integrity on the agenda is very exciting and very satisfying.
The Queen's Birthday Honours list also includes Australia's only gold medalist at this year's Winter Olympics, Chikara Anthony, who won the women's skiing moguls in Beijing.
Protesters in Brazil are demanding further action from the authorities a week after a local Indigenous expert and a British journalist went missing in the Amazon. A fisherman has been arrested on suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of Bruno Pereira and Dom Phillips. Drug trafficking and illegal deforestation is rife in the area of the Amazon where the pair's gone missing. Deutsche Welle's Nimisha Jaswal reports.
The search continues. British journalist Dom Phillips and Brazilian indigenous expert Bruno Pereira were last seen on June 5th. The two had received threats as they conducted research in Brazil's Javari Valley, a forested region which has seen a surge in illegal fishing, logging, mining and drug trafficking. Police have arrested one man so far, suspected of tailing the missing men. A spot of blood was found on his boat. Locals have joined in on the search too, but there is still no sign of the missing men.
We haven't found anything. We came all the way on the river, and there is nothing.
Brazilian authorities, including the president, say they are taking action.
From the moment they went missing, our armed forces and federal police have been unstoppable in the tireless search for these people. We pray to God that they are found alive.
But pressure is mounting on the Bolsonaro government, which has faced accusations that it did not scale up the search fast enough. The disappearances are a reflection of a state policy of complete disregard for the environmental cause, for protected areas, for the public servants, for state servants fulfilling their function, and for the indigenous themselves in their own territory. The far-right president has also been criticized for allowing a surge in deforestation in the Amazon and pushing to open protected indigenous lands to mining, subjects the two missing men were looking into.
A Norwegian climber is on track to beat the time record for summiting the globe's most challenging peaks, those 8,000 metres and above. It's part of a mission to change how the mountaineering world views female athletes. The BBC's Stephanie Prentice reports.
Scaling 14 of the world's highest peaks in a race against the clock to beat a record set by a male climber. A mission some said was impossible, but one Norwegian climber, Kristin Harala, has taken on not just for herself, but for all female climbers.
There is a lot of girls and women that wants to climb and they wants to have a sponsorship from the brands, but when it's more easy for the brands to believe in what the men are presenting, like they are going to do, it's so much harder for women to get the sponsorship.
Her goal is to outpace the time set by Nepali adventurer Nirmal Purja, who reached the 14 summits in 6 months and 6 days, beating the previous record and leading to a documentary on Netflix. The 8,000ers, as the peaks are known, are the only mountains on the planet with death zones, where the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is insufficient to sustain human life. But for Kristin, the mountains themselves may not be the hardest obstacles to tackle. Despite securing some sponsorship deals, she says she had to sell her apartment to fund the project and still needs more money to finish it. Her team are now preparing to set off to Pakistan to climb their next 5 targets, including K2, but to get there, they've got to raise more funds. She's been raising awareness by documenting the trip with videos from snow-capped summits. And says despite the challenges, she's confident of reaching her goals while also reaching a global audience.
So I hope for more equal sport and that we can use this project to challenge the industry to do something.
According to Nepalese government data, this year only a fifth of all climbers in the Himalayas, where the majority of the highest peaks are, have been women.
And that's pretty much all we've got time for this evening. Don't forget the Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night, so do stay tuned. If you missed anything from the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from, as they say. And thank you so much for all your feedback, lots of it on Jib. So here's the thing, ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up's going to speak to Simplicity's Sam Stubbs about his upcoming meeting about the plasterboard crisis, and he's talking to Fletcher's boss, Ross Taylor. That's tomorrow, 5 a.m.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister will conduct what she's describing as a more comprehensive review of her cabinet lineup at the start of next year, following today's reshuffle. The Northern Buller region may see an earlier reprieve from stormy conditions than expected after a change in the direction of weather patterns over the west coast. The local share market has had its worst session in nearly 4 months, plunging to a 2-year low. And Fletcher Building says it's ramping up jib production and importing plasterboard to try to meet the critical shortage in the building sector. That's the news. Headlines, I should say. I'll update you with the latest news and weather at 7.
This morning on First Up, wild weather for the country over the weekend continued into Monday.
Very heavy this morning. We had very torrential rain at 3 a.m. It's just easing off now.
Today, the cold front that hit the South Island on Saturday is now that cold air is moving around the North Island.
And could America actually be getting closer to real change on the firearms front?
Background checks are enhanced. The full detail of that will be interesting to see actually how effective it will be. The next one is red flag laws. Now, these are basically emergency search and seizure notices.
I'm Nathan Rarere.
Voice of the Nathan.
Thank you. Good timing. You can download First Up, the podcast, or listen weekday mornings live from 5 on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Nathan. And yes, the weather has continued to be wild
and unpredictable since Nathan went to air between 5 and 6 this morning. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night, which commences after the news at 7.